His father's 70th birthday celebration turned into the night Adrian Calder's familiar world fractured, changing forever. The gleam of crystal chandeliers reflected in glasses of sparkling champagne, creating an atmosphere of luxury in the enormous ballroom. Close and distant relatives, influential business partners, and old friends of the Calder family patriarch had gathered from all corners of his business empire to mark this momentous occasion. His father was hailed as nothing short of a legend, admired for the perseverance and talent that allowed him to build a multi-million-dollar fortune from virtually nothing, transforming the humble Calder Enterprises into a corporation valued at $120 million. To everyone else, he was an extraordinary man, but to Adrian, he remained an unattainable figure, a man whose recognition he had fruitlessly sought his entire life. Watching the proceedings from the sidelines, Victor Calder rose from his seat. The clink of a silver fork against a glass instantly drew the attention of everyone present. Hundreds of eyes turned towards him. Even at 70, he maintained an authoritative posture and an imposing presence. His perfectly combed gray hair, custom-tailored elegant black suit, and a voice that resonated with the confidence of a man who tolerated no objections. "Dear friends," he announced, raising his glass, "today we celebrate more than just my birthday. Today, we determine the future of everything I have built." Adrian's older brother, Nolan, standing nearby, smirked smugly, as if he already knew what was about to happen. He had always been the favorite, the one groomed as heir. Nolan, just 2 years Adrian's senior, inherited his father's strong jawline and piercing gaze and seemed to take pride in the resemblance. He lived in a luxurious penthouse, flew on a private jet, and held a high position in the company, though it was clear to all that he hadn't earned it. Adrian stood quietly in a corner, his glass untouched. Deep down, he still harbored a faint hope that his father might, perhaps, finally acknowledge his worth. Victor raised his glass even higher and solemnly declared, "It is with immense pride that I announce my successor in managing Calder Enterprises will be my son, Nolan, who will also inherit my New York penthouse and, of course, the aircraft that has served me faithfully for many years." The hall erupted in applause. Nolan, basking in the universal attention, beamed with a satisfied smile. Adrian's chest tightened painfully, but he refused to let his emotions show. Then his father's gaze swept across the room and settled on him. "As for you, Adrian," he pronounced, and his words struck like a bolt from the blue, "you will receive nothing." A murmur rippled through the hall, but Victor wasn't finished. "Because you are not my son." Laughter broke out in the room. Some tried to hide it behind masks of politeness, others cackled openly. Adrian froze, stunned. His blood seemed to turn to ice, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. His mother, Elena, sat at the head table, eyes downcast, pale as a ghost. She always tried to avoid conflict, but her silence at that moment hurt no less than his father's words. Nolan burst into loud laughter, leaning towards his father as if he'd heard a witty joke. The guests, eager to please the man of the hour, joined in the laughter. Adrian felt the weight of hundreds of gazes upon him. His ears burned, and his insides twisted with pain, but he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing his weakness. He clenched his fists convulsively beneath the tablecloth. Inside, his heart was tearing apart. His whole life, he had strived to prove he was worthy of his father's recognition. But in one swift moment, his father had stripped him of everything. Not just an inheritance or wealth, but his very identity. He had publicly erased him from his life, humiliating him in the eyes of everyone who mattered in his world. The laughter grew, echoing in his head until a new sound cut through it. A man stood up at the back of the room. He wore a dark, custom-tailored suit, and his calm yet confident presence immediately drew attention. The laughter instantly ceased, replaced by tense curiosity. The man adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. "Mr. Calder," he stated in a firm, even voice, "this declaration is not only cruel, but also untrue." All eyes turned to him. For the first time that evening, a shadow of confusion flickered across his father's face. Nolan frowned, clearly caught off guard. Adrian's heart pounded faster. The room, so recently filled with laughter, plunged into a deafening silence. Only the faint clinking of ice in glasses could be heard as people shifted uncomfortably. For the first time that evening, a glimmer of hope sparked in Adrian's soul, though he had no idea who this stranger was or why he had chosen to intervene. But one thing was clear. What he was about to say could change everything. Before that fateful night in the glittering ballroom, Adrian Calder's life had seemed merely a pale shadow cast by his father and brother. Adrian, bearing that name, outwardly enjoyed every possible comfort and privilege, but the truth was far harsher. He was born into a family where power was the main currency, and displays of affection were as rare as an oasis in the desert. Victor Calder, his father, was the architect of this reality. He built the Calder Enterprises empire with such relentless, almost predatory ambition that it crushed competitors and even damaged relationships with those closest to him. To the outside world, he was a business titan, the embodiment of success and prosperity. To Adrian, he was a man whose value system was measured exclusively in dollars, loyalty, and unquestioning obedience. From early childhood, when Adrian was just learning to walk, he acutely felt the difference in his father's treatment of him compared to his older brother Nolan. Nolan was a precise, almost ominous copy of Victor in every way, the same authoritative demeanor, the same unwavering self-confidence, and the same insatiable hunger for control. Adrian vividly remembered when, at the age of 7, Nolan scored his first goal on the soccer field, right before their father's eyes. Victor sprang to his feet, clapped thunderously, and proudly shouted his son's name. In the very same game, when Adrian stumbled and scraped his knee, his father didn't even spare him a glance. Instead, he snapped, "Get up, Adrian. Don't embarrass me." He rose, but not because of his father's words. He rose because his grandfather once told him, "Falling doesn't define you, Adrian. How you rise does." This grandfather, his mother's father, was the only person who had ever given him the attention and care every child's heart craves. Henry Marrow, as he was called, passed away when Adrian was 19, but his lessons remained etched in his memory forever. He wasn't a wealthy man like Victor, but he possessed a quiet, unwavering dignity. He taught Adrian honesty, hard work, and the importance of holding his head high, even when others tried to demean him. His grandfather never said it directly, but Adrian always felt he understood how much of an outsider he felt within the Calder family. His mother, Elena, was a woman of rare beauty and refinement, but a heavy aura of silence always clung to her. She rarely contradicted Victor. Sometimes Adrian wondered if she feared him or had simply resigned herself to her role in his world. With her son, she was gentle, but never fiercely protective. Her love seemed genuine, but somewhat muted, as if it had to exist in the shadows to avoid disturbing his father's peace. By the time Adrian was in high school, he had stopped expecting fairness from Victor. His father provided Nolan with the best tutors, the best connections, and the most prestigious internships. Adrian, however, forged his own path. He was passionate about design and construction, so he decided to study architecture. He worked odd jobs, saved money, and earned scholarships. He didn't aspire to his father's empire. He wanted to build something of his own, something that belonged only to him. Nevertheless, no matter how much he convinced himself he didn't care, a part of his soul yearned for his father's approval. It manifested in small ways. Every birthday, he hoped his father would look at him and say he was proud. Every time he shared a new project he was working on, he waited for even a flicker of interest in his eyes. But Victor's gaze always returned to Nolan, as if Adrian were merely a shadow in the corner of the room. Over the years, the chasm between them only widened. Nolan became a senior executive at Calder Enterprises at the age of 27. In truth, he didn't earn the position. It was bestowed upon him by birthright. He was reckless with money and arrogant with people. Yet, his father defended him at every turn. Adrian, by contrast, opened his own small architectural firm. It wasn't huge, but it was his creation. He worked diligently, earned the respect of clients, and built a life he considered honest and dignified. However, at family gatherings, Nolan's voice always dominated. His achievements were lauded, his future discussed in meticulous detail. When the invitation to Victor's 70th birthday celebration arrived, Adrian wasn't surprised. He knew it would be a grand affair, with a lavish ballroom adorned with chandeliers and a guest list straight out of a glossy magazine. He knew Nolan would be the center of attention. But something inside him still clung to the hope that perhaps his father would see him differently on his 70th birthday. Perhaps age had softened his heart. Perhaps he had realized that success meant nothing without family. This hope compelled Adrian to wear his best suit that evening. He convinced himself he was going to honor his father, even if his father had never honored him. He mentally rehearsed words of gratitude, imagining a moment when his father might nod to him and finally acknowledge him as his son. As Adrian entered the ballroom, the splendor of the sight nearly rendered him speechless. Golden light reflected off the marble floors, chandeliers glittered like scattered stars, and impeccably uniformed waiters weaved among the guests, carrying trays of champagne. Old business partners, family members, friends, and relatives he hadn't seen in years filled the tables. Everywhere he looked, there were smiles and laughter. Yet, even in this crowd, Adrian felt profoundly alone. Nolan spotted him first. He sauntered over, a glass of amber scotch in hand, a wide, smug grin spreading across his face. "Well, if it isn't the Calder family's charity case," he sneered, loud enough for Adrian to hear. Adrian's jaw clenched involuntarily, but he remained silent. Nolan craved a reaction, wanted to provoke him. Instead, Adrian let the insult hang in the air and walked past him. He found his place at the back of the hall, not far from where his mother sat silently beside his father's chair. He nodded to her, but she only offered a faint smile in return before turning away. Adrian told himself it didn't matter. He had come to pay his respects, nothing more. Deep down, however, he yearned for something greater. He wanted to believe that this night could be an exception, that this time his father would look at him not as an unwelcome son, not as an outsider, but as Adrian, his child. Sipping water and watching guests raise their glasses to toast his father, Adrian reminded himself of the words his grandfather had told him before he died. A man's worth is measured not by who ignores him, but by how he carries himself when the world does. He didn't know then that these words would be tested in a way he could never have imagined. The moment Victor Calder rose at the head of the ballroom, the room fell into complete silence. Even at 70, he commanded attention like no other. He tapped his fork against his glass, and the sound resonated sharply against the hushed chatter. Adrian knew something significant was about to happen. His father was not a man who wasted words, and when he spoke, he expected the world to listen. Victor raised his glass and declared, "Today, we celebrate not only my life. Today, we honor the future. Everything I have built, everything I have worked for, must live on. Today, I will name my successor." The applause was immediate, almost rehearsed. Adrian's eyes involuntarily shifted to Nolan, who was already grinning broadly, chest puffed out, ready to claim the crown he believed had always rightfully belonged to him. Nolan wore an impeccable dark blue suit, his tie perfectly knotted, and a self-satisfied expression of anticipation on his face. Adrian sat motionless, his heart heavy but calm. A small, deeply buried part of his soul still hoped his father might surprise him, that perhaps he would say both his sons would share the inheritance, that perhaps for the first time Adrian would stand beside Nolan as an equal. Victor's voice cut through his thoughts. "My son, Nolan Calder, will inherit Calder Enterprises. He will take control of my $120 million company, continue my vision, and carry my name into the future." The crowd erupted in loud, enthusiastic applause. Glasses clinked, smiles spread across every face. Victor raised a hand to quiet them, then continued, "Along with Calder Enterprises, Nolan will inherit my New York penthouse and the private jet that has carried me to every corner of the globe." Nolan raised his glass with a proud smile, reveling in the universal admiration. People leaned in to shake his hand, pat his shoulder, congratulate him. He shone in the spotlight, basking in glory. Then Victor turned his gaze to Adrian. His sharp blue eyes met Adrian's, and the air seemed to thicken. He pronounced, "As for you, Adrian, you will receive nothing." The words were spoken without hesitation, without the slightest hint of warmth. The applause died down. The room fell silent. And then Victor delivered a blow that wounded Adrian deeper than anything he had ever experienced. "You will receive nothing because you are not actually my son." For a moment, there was stunned silence, and then laughter erupted. It began with a few quiet snickers, but quickly spread like wildfire. Guests laughed into their glasses. Some nudged each neighbors, whispering. Others laughed openly, unashamedly mocking Adrian. Nolan threw his head back and roared with laughter, clearly enjoying the unfolding spectacle. Adrian's face burned with shame, but he sat frozen in his chair. His chest felt constricted, his throat dry. It felt as if the earth had opened beneath him, and he was falling into an abyss before the eyes of everyone he had ever known. He had expected his father to favor Nolan. He had expected him to choose Nolan as his heir. But to strip him of his identity, to publicly declare him not his son, was an act of cruelty Victor was capable of that he had never imagined. Adrian glanced at his mother. She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her head slightly buoyed. She said not a word. She offered no objection. Her silence was more deafening than any laughter in that room. She watched her son being humiliated and did nothing. A hurricane of emotions raged within Adrian. Anger, bitterness, betrayal, and shame crashed over him simultaneously. He wanted to leap to his feet and scream that his father was lying, that he was his son, that his blood ran in his veins, whether he acknowledged it or not. He wanted to pound his fist on the table and wipe the smug grin off Nolan's face. But he didn't. Instead, he remained seated, clenching his hands into fists beneath the tablecloth, his nails digging into his palms. The sounds of laughter seemed endless, like a storm assailing him from all sides. He donned a mask of impassivity, refusing to let them see the tears that threatened to stream from his eyes. Victor smirked, as if proud of the effect he had created. Nolan leaned in and whispered something to him, and they both chuckled in response. Guests watched Adrian with a mixture of mockery and pity. Some shook their heads as if he deserved it. Others simply enjoyed the unfolding drama. In that moment, Adrian remembered his grandfather. His words echoed in his mind. A man's worth is measured not by who ignores him, but by how he carries himself when the world does. These words brought him some solace. He sat upright, silent, outwardly unbroken, though a deep wound bled within him. The humiliation reached its peak when one of Nolan's friends raised a glass and shouted, "To the true heir!" The crowd roared with laughter again. Adrian's heart pounded wildly, his vision blurred, but he remained silent. The weight of the betrayal pressed down on him more heavily than anything he had ever experienced in his life. He realized that in his father's eyes, he had never been his son. Victor had merely tolerated his presence because he was forced to. All the years of hoping for his approval, all the years of hard work to prove himself, had been meaningless. His silence was not a sign of weakness, it was survival. If he had spoken at that moment, his words would have been drowned out by waves of laughter. If he had jumped to his feet, he would have looked desperate. So he remained still, and this choice proved to be the only thing that saved him. Because, as the last echoes of laughter faded through the ballroom, something completely unexpected happened. A man in a custom-tailored suit stood up at the back of the room. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and spoke in a strong, even voice. "Mr. Calder, with all due respect, this statement is not only cruel, but also false." The laughter ceased instantly, and all heads turned towards him. Victor's face tightened, Nolan's smug grin vanished instantly, and the air filled with heavy silence. Adrian also turned, and his eyes met the man's gaze, and for the first time all evening, he felt something ignite within him. Hope. The man in the impeccable suit stood straight at the back of the ballroom, his presence piercing the atmosphere of general jubilation like the tip of a blade. The crowd, which had been shaking with laughter moments before, froze in tense anticipation. A tense atmosphere permeated the hall as the stranger, exuding confidence and authority, made his appearance. His impeccable suit, perfectly tied cravat, and neatly styled dark hair marked him as a man more suited to a courtroom than a celebratory event. "Mr. Calder," he pronounced in a firm, deep voice, full of unwavering conviction, "your statement is false." A murmur of confusion rippled through the hall. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, trying to understand what was happening. Adrian's father, Victor, squinted, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. "And who are you to challenge my words in my own home?" he demanded. The stranger deliberately stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking distinctly on the marble floor. Stopping near Victor's table, he introduced himself. "My name is Daniel Mercer." I represent the interests of Henry Marrow, your wife Elena's late father, and Adrian's grandfather." The name of his grandfather, the man who had always believed in Adrian, struck like a bolt from the blue. For years, he had believed his connection to his grandfather had been severed with his death. To hear his name at this moment of humiliation was like a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. Victor's jaw tightened. Henry died over a decade ago. What business could he possibly have left? Daniel Mercer looked at him calmly. "The business of truth and a matter of inheritance. Mr. Marrow left documents that were sealed and entrusted to me. He foresaw a day like this." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Adrian's brother, Nolan's smug grin was replaced by a look of alarm. Adrian's mother paled and gripped her hands tighter, her gaze darting between her husband and the lawyer. Victor sneered. "This is absurd. You burst into my celebration and spout nonsense before my guests." "Adrian is not my son. That fact remains unchanged, and nothing you say will alter it." For the first time that evening, Adrian rose from his seat. The scrape of his chair against the polished floor drew everyone's attention. He forced himself to stand tall, and his voice came out steady. "Then let him speak, Father. If there is truth here, I want to hear it." A gasp swept through the room again. Adrian had broken his silence, and the weight of that decision was felt by all. Victor glared at his son, his eyes burning with fury. "Sit down, Adrian. Don't make things worse." But Adrian did not obey. He met his father's gaze, refusing to remain silent any longer. "I have been humiliated in front of everyone. If there is more to my story, I deserve to know it." For the first time in his life, he defied his father. It was not an outburst of rage, but a display of quiet strength. He was no longer a child seeking approval or a shadow hiding behind Nolan. He was a man demanding the truth. Daniel Mercer nodded to Adrian. "Your grandfather ensured you would never be erased, Adrian. He left his legacy in your hands. The documents I carry prove this, and I will not allow his will to be ignored." The room filled with whispers. Guests craned their necks, eager to learn what revelations would be disclosed. Nolan leaned towards Victor, whispering something insistently, but his father's face remained impassive. He was losing control of the situation, which was his greatest fear. Something shifted within Adrian. All the years of silence, humiliation, and pretense had led to this moment. He realized that his decision to stand up and demand the truth was not just an act of defiance, but the first step towards liberation from the cage his father had built around him. Daniel Mercer retrieved a sealed envelope from his briefcase. Inside this envelope are documents that were to be revealed only if Adrian's place in this family was rejected. Henry Marrow saw the cruelty in this house. He foresaw that Victor Calder would one day attempt to erase his grandson. Today, his prediction has come true. The silence became stifling. Every guest froze, awaiting further developments. Victor gripped the edge of the table convulsively, his knuckles white. Nolan's face flushed with anger. Adrian's mother whispered something indistinct. Adrian took a deep breath, his chest filling with resolve. He had spent his entire life waiting for his father to choose him. But tonight, he chose himself. He looked directly at Daniel Mercer and said, "Open it. Tell them everything." This decision marked a turning point. Whatever the envelope contained, there was no going back. The truth, long hidden, was about to come to light, and Adrian was ready to face it. Daniel Mercer broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper echoed through the hall, silencing the recent laughter. Guests leaned forward, anticipating the revelation. Adrian's heart pounded, but he stood firm. The humiliation he had felt moments ago was replaced by determination. He no longer cared about his father's approval, Nolan's arrogance, or the opinions of outsiders. Only the truth mattered. And in that moment, Adrian realized something he had never understood before. His strength did not come from Victor Calder, nor from Calder Enterprises, nor from a penthouse or a private jet. It came from his decision to stand tall, demand respect, and assert his right to be seen. The turning point was not only in Daniel Mercer's hands, but in his own. And for the first time in his life, Adrian felt ready for whatever lay ahead. Silence reigned in the ballroom, broken only by the sound of tearing paper. Every gaze was fixed on Daniel Mercer. The same guests who had laughed at Adrian minutes earlier now leaned forward anxiously. The golden chandeliers shone above them, but the air felt heavy with anticipation. Daniel carefully unfolded the papers and, glancing at Adrian, addressed the assembly. His voice was clear and true. "This is the last will and testament of Henry Marrow. The document was signed and notarized before his death and entrusted to me with clear instructions. Its purpose was to protect Adrian Calder, his grandson, should his identity or rightful place in the family be rejected." A collective gasp swept through the hall. Adrian's mother closed her eyes, as if she had been waiting for this moment but dreaded its arrival. Victor's face remained pale but composed. Nolan shifted uneasily, his smirk gone. Daniel continued, "Henry Marrow was not only a man of principle but also a visionary. He acquired a controlling interest in Calder Enterprises in its early days, when Victor Calder needed capital to build his empire. These shares were never sold. Upon his death, they were transferred to Adrian Calder, who is the rightful owner of 51% of Calder Enterprises." An unimaginable hush fell over the ballroom. Guests, as if struck by lightning, froze in astonishment. Some let out muffled groans, others exchanged agitated whispers, and the boldest even stood up to get a better look at the cause of the commotion. Adrian's heart pounded wildly like a caged bird, and for a moment he was speechless. 51% of the shares, more than half of the company, an entire empire his father had built and cherished his whole life, was now, against all expectations, passing into his hands. Daniel, like a seasoned conductor, raised a hand, calling for silence. Furthermore, Mr. Marrow left a personal message for Adrian, to be read only after these documents were disclosed. He handed Adrian a sealed letter, lightly yellowed with age. The young man's hands trembled as he accepted the burden. The sheet of paper felt as if it weighed a ton. Victor, as if awakening from a daze, broke the silence, his voice sharp and angry. "This is absurd. My company is mine. My son Nolan earned it. That old man had no right to interfere in my affairs." Daniel, unflinching, met his furious gaze. "It ceased to be solely your company the moment you accepted Henry Marrow's investment. You may have founded Calder Enterprises, Mr. Calder, but it was your father-in-law who ensured its survival. His shares are legally indisputable, and Adrian is now their rightful owner." The murmuring in the crowd intensified. Like an electrical discharge, scandal pierced the air. Nolan, turning to his father, cried out in desperation, "Tell him it's a lie! Stop this madness now!" But his father, as if speechless, could not utter a word. For the first time in his life, Adrian saw something in his eyes he had never noticed before. Fear. Trembling, Adrian broke the seal of the letter. His grandfather's familiar handwriting, steady and clear, filled the page. He read silently at first, each word sinking deep into his soul. "Adrian, I knew a day would come when you would face trials. I saw the cruelty in Victor's heart and his clear preference for Nolan. I wanted you to know that you were never an unwanted child. You are my blood, my grandson, and my greatest hope. I invested in this company not for Victor, but for you. When the time came, I wanted you to have the power to choose your own path. Do not let their cruelty break you. Let your strength be your compass." A lump in his throat made it hard to breathe. For years, Adrian had considered himself invisible, unworthy, forgotten. But now, holding this letter, he saw proof that he had been seen and believed in all along. He looked up and met his father's gaze. Victor's face was ashen, his fists tightly gripping the edge of the table. The man who minutes ago had humiliated him now sat helpless and pathetic. The man who had declared him nothing was now contradicted before the eyes of everyone he had so desperately sought to impress. Nolan, furious, slammed his fist on the table, his voice trembling with anger. "This is ridiculous. You don't think you can handle this, do you? You have no experience, no knowledge." For the first time all evening, Adrian spoke with confidence in his voice. "You're wrong, Nolan. I have everything I need. I have the truth. I have the belief of the only person who ever truly believed in me. And now I have the power to decide the fate of this company." Silence once again fell over the room. His words resonated louder than the music that had once filled the hall. Guests looked at him no longer with mockery, but with respect. Adrian's mother finally rose from her seat. Her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the room. Your grandfather always knew, Adrian. He told me many times that you were the one in whom his spirit lived. Today, I am proud that he was right." Tears glistened in her eyes as she looked at her son, perhaps for the first time, not with doubt, but with pride. Victor tried to stand, but his legs buckled, and he sank back into his chair. His empire, his power, his dominance had crumbled in an instant. He had mocked Adrian, stripped him of his dignity, erased his name, but truth had triumphed over his cruelty. Adrian carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. His voice was calm but firm. "I never sought your wealth, Father. I never asked for your empire. All I ever wanted was your respect. But today, I realized I don't need it. My worth doesn't depend on you. It comes from myself and from the man who believed in me when you didn't." The applause that followed these words was sincere and well-deserved. It came from people who had finally heard the truth and felt respect for Adrian. Some guests even stood, expressing their admiration. Nolan, his face contorted with rage, stormed out of the ballroom. Adrian's father remained seated in his chair, silent and defeated. In that moment, Adrian felt something he had never experienced before: freedom. The applause gradually faded, leaving behind a heavy silence, different from the one at the beginning of the evening. This silence was filled with respect, realization, and a sense of impending change. In the heart of the luxurious ballroom, where he had once been merely a shadow, an unrecognized son, now stood Adrian. Years of neglect, alienation, and denial of his place in the family seemed to have vanished. In Adrian's hands was a hidden truth, capable of restoring his dignity and changing the course of events. His mother, Elena, was the first to approach him. Her steps were uncertain, her face reflecting a struggle between sorrow and pride. Stopping before Adrian, she extended a trembling hand. A long pause of silence was broken only by the searching gaze of her tear-filled eyes. Finally, Elena's voice came. "Adrian, I should have protected you, spoken up years ago, but I remained silent out of fear. Today, I see the man you've become, and I am proud of you. Your grandfather would be proud of you too." Her words filled the void Adrian had carried within him for years. He nodded, unable to express the full range of his feelings, relief and forgiveness. Gently squeezing his mother's hand, he whispered words of gratitude. On the opposite side of the hall, as if petrified, sat his father, Victor Calder, once the all-powerful builder of an empire, now merely a pale shadow of his former self. His shoulders slumped, and his face expressed not pride but defeat. He avoided eye contact, his gaze fixed on the table. The man who had once mocked Adrian, stripping him of all significance, was now speechless. Nolan, Adrian's brother, had stormed out of the hall in a rage minutes earlier, slamming the door. From childhood, Nolan had been the favorite, the heir, the object of universal admiration. But today, that illusion had shattered. Stripped of his father's protection, he was just an ordinary man, unprepared to accept the truth. Guests whispered amongst themselves, breaking into small groups. Some avoided Adrian's gaze, embarrassed by their previous mockery. Others approached, shaking his hand and expressing their respect. "Your grandfather raised a worthy man," one elderly gentleman remarked. Another added, "It takes immense strength to stand tall in the face of humiliation. Today, you gain something greater than all the wealth in the world." These words, perhaps carrying less weight than the speakers intended, nonetheless brought the recognition Adrian had yearned for his entire life. At the end of the evening, Adrian stepped out into the cool New York air. City lights twinkled against the dark skyway, and the distant hum of traffic filled the night. For the first time in years, he felt a lightness. The burden of rejection no longer weighed on his shoulders, and his steps no longer dragged under the weight of futile attempts to be noticed. Adrian took his grandfather's letter from his jacket pocket and reread it under the glow of a street lamp. The old man's words were full of solace. "Do not let their cruelty define you. Let your strength be your definition." His grandfather had entrusted him to carry on his legacy not through wealth or power, but through character. In that moment, Adrian realized that his true inheritance was not a company, a penthouse, or a private jet, but the truth, resilience, and dignity his grandfather had left him. He remembered himself as a boy, standing on the soccer field with scraped knees while his father ignored him. That boy had grown into a man who had finally proven his worth, not to his father, but to himself. The lessons of that night were clear. Family is not defined by cruelty or blood ties. True worth lies not in wealth or recognition, but in the courage to stand when others want you to fall. His father had tried to strip Adrian of everything, but instead, he had revealed a strength within him that he never knew he possessed. Looking up at the night sky, Adrian felt a peace he had never experienced before. He no longer sought his father's approval, nor competed with his brother's shadow. He stood as an individual, carrying on the legacy of the man who had always believed in him. That night, Adrian walked into the ballroom as a forgotten son and emerged as the rightful heir, not just to a company but to the truth, and to the man his grandfather had always known he could become. This story is important because each of us, to varying degrees, faces moments when we are told we are not good enough. We encounter rejection, humiliation, or betrayal. But these moments do not define us. What defines us is how we rise, how we choose to conduct ourselves when the world laughs in our face.